Have you ever felt so lost that even simple English sounds like noise, love feels distant, and life in America becomes too heavy to carry? This is my real story, from hopeless nights, cultural confusion, and broken communication, to finding love, building a family, and slowly learning to speak, understand, and belong. If you've ever wanted to quit, stay with me. Hopeless night in America. There was a night in America when everything felt too quiet and too loud at the same time. The kind of silence that makes your thoughts echo. The kind of noise that only exists inside your head. I sat on the edge of a small bed, in a small room, in a country that felt too big for me. Outside the window, the streetlights looked cold. Cars passed by, fast and distant, like they had somewhere important to be. I didn't. I remember holding my phone, staring at a simple English message someone had sent me earlier that day. Just one sentence. Not long. Not complicated. But my brain refused to understand it. I read it again. And again. Slowly. Word by word. I will get back to you later. Simple, right? But in that moment, it felt like a puzzle. My mind translated each word separately, like a broken machine. I will get back to you later. And somehow, it still didn't feel natural. It didn't feel alive. It didn't feel like real communication. It felt like I was standing outside a glass wall, watching people talk, laugh, connect, while I stayed stuck on the other side. That night, I whispered to myself, very slowly, almost like a child learning to speak. I will get back to you later. The sentence sounded strange in my mouth. Heavy. Uncomfortable. Like wearing shoes that don't fit. And something inside me cracked a little. Because it wasn't just about one sentence. It was about everything. It was about going to the grocery store and not understanding the cashier when she asked a simple question. It was about smiling awkwardly and saying yes when I wasn't even sure what I was agreeing to. It was about replaying conversations in my head again and again at night, thinking, why didn't I understand that? Why couldn't I answer? There's a psychological reason for this. When your brain is under stress, especially in a new environment, it goes into something like survival mode. Scientists call it cognitive overload. Your brain is trying to process language, culture, tone, body language, and emotion, all at once. It's like opening 20 tabs on a slow computer. Everything freezes. Everything lags. That was me. Not stupid. Not lazy. Just overloaded. But in that moment, sitting alone in that small room, I didn't think about science. I didn't think about psychology. I only felt one thing. Hopeless. I can't do this, I said quietly. And that sentence was the most dangerous one. Because once your brain starts believing I can't, it begins to collect evidence. Every mistake becomes proof. Every awkward silence becomes confirmation. Every misunderstanding becomes another brick in a wall that traps you. The next day, I went outside anyway. The air was cold. Much colder than what I was used to. America felt different. Not just the language, but everything. People walked fast. They spoke fast. They lived fast. Even the way they smiled felt efficient. Quick. Polite. Gone. I entered a small coffee shop. The smell was warm, comforting. For a second, I felt safe. Then the barista asked, "What can I get started for you?" My brain froze again. Not because the sentence was hard, but because it was real. It was fast. It was not a textbook. It was not a recording I could replay. I panicked. Coffee, I said. She smiled. What kind? And just like that, my mind went blank. There were too many choices. Too many words I didn't fully understand.
Latte? Americano?
Cappuccino? What was the difference? Why did it feel like a test I hadn't studied for? Just coffee, I repeated a little louder this time, hoping confidence could replace clarity.
She nodded, still kind.
But I could feel it, that small gap between us. Not judgment, just distance. And distance hurts more than rejection sometimes. I took my cup and sat down. I watched people talk,
Laugh.
order without thinking. Words flowed out of them like water. Natural. Effortless. I picked up my cup and whispered again, this time a new sentence. One coffee, please.
Slow.
Careful. Controlled. This is how it started for me. Not with big goals. Not with motivation speeches. Not with perfect grammar. Just small, awkward sentences repeated in a quiet corner. There's something important happening here, even if it doesn't look impressive. When you repeat simple, real-life sentences slowly, your brain begins to build neural pathways. Think of it like creating a small road in a forest. The first time it's hard. You push through branches. You get lost. But the more you walk that path, the clearer it becomes. That's how language works. Not by memorizing everything, but by living it one sentence at a time. Still, that night came back again. And again. Every evening felt heavier than the last. Because during the day, you can distract yourself. You can try. You can pretend. But at night, when everything is quiet, the truth gets louder. I don't belong here, I thought. And maybe the hardest part wasn't the language. It was the feeling of being invisible, of having thoughts, stories, emotions, but no easy way to share them. That's when hopelessness grows. Not like an explosion, but like a slow leak. Quiet, steady, almost invisible, until one day, you realize you can't breathe the same way anymore. But here's the strange part. That night, the same night, I felt the lowest something very small happened. Not a miracle. Not a big change. Just a thought. If I can understand one sentence tomorrow, just one, maybe that's enough. It didn't sound powerful. It didn't sound inspiring. But it was real. And sometimes, real is stronger than perfect. Because hope doesn't always come as a loud voice. Sometimes, it whispers. Very slowly. Just like the English I was trying to learn. And that whisper said, try again tomorrow. When English became a wall. Morning in America doesn't wait for you to feel ready. It just starts. Light comes in through the window like it has a job to do, and suddenly you're part of a world that's already moving. Cars, voices, notifications, conversations, everything feels one step ahead of you. That morning, I stood in front of a mirror and said one simple sentence. I will try again today. Slow, clear, careful. It sounded better than yesterday. Not perfect, but less broken. And for a moment, I felt something small, maybe control. Then I stepped outside. And control disappeared almost immediately. Because English in real life doesn't come one sentence at a time. It comes fast. It overlaps. It blends. People don't pause after each word like your learning app does. They don't wait for your brain to catch up. They just talk. And your brain? It tries to chase everything at once. That day, I took the bus. Just a short ride.
Simple, right?
That's what I thought. The driver said something as I got on. I heard sounds, not meaning. My brain grabbed one word, card, but missed the rest. I hesitated. Too long. He repeated it, faster this time. Still nothing. So I did what many people do when they don't understand. I guessed. I handed him my card. He nodded. It worked. Problem solved on the outside. But inside, something else happened. A quiet voice said, "You didn't understand. You just survived." That's the difference nobody tells you about. Surviving a conversation is not the same as understanding it. And when you keep surviving instead of understanding, English slowly turns into a wall. Not a visible wall. Not something you can touch. But something you feel every time someone speaks and your brain goes blank. That wall followed me everywhere. At the supermarket, a worker asked, "Do you need a bag?" I froze again. Why need? Why not want? My brain started analyzing instead of answering. Too late. The moment passed. At a small park, someone tried to start a casual conversation. "Nice weather today, huh?" I knew the words. I had studied them. But real life doesn't give you subtitles. The tone, the speed, the rhythm, it all felt different. I smiled, nodded, said nothing. And just like that, another small connection disappeared. Here's something interesting about the human brain. When you repeatedly face situations where you don't understand, your brain begins to associate that environment with stress. It activates your amygdala, the part responsible for fear and emotional reactions. And once that happens, your ability to process language actually decreases. In simple terms, the more nervous you feel, the worse your English becomes. And the worse your English becomes, the more nervous you feel. It's a loop. A very quiet, very frustrating loop. By the afternoon, I was tired. Not physically, mentally, emotionally. It felt like my brain had been running all day without rest. Every sound required effort. Every sentence felt like a test. I went back to my room and sat down again, same place as the night before. Phone in hand. This time, I opened a short audio message someone had sent me. I pressed play. A normal voice. Natural speed. Friendly tone. I understood, maybe 20%. I replayed it. 30%. Again. 40%. It was slow progress, but it was something.
So I did something different that day.
Instead of trying to understand everything, I focused on one sentence. Just one. "I'll call you when I get home." I paused the audio. Repeated it. "I'll call you when I get home." Again. This time, I paid attention to the sound. Not the grammar. Not the translation. Just the rhythm. "I'll call you when I get home."
Faster.
"I'll call you when I get home." Something clicked. Not a big breakthrough. Just a small alignment between my ears and my mouth. And that's when I realized something important. English is not just information. It's a physical skill. Your brain, your ears, your mouth, they all have to work together. And like any skill, it feels unnatural at first. Like trying to write with your non-dominant hand. Messy.
Slow.
Frustrating. But not impossible. Still, the wall didn't disappear. That evening, I received another message. This time, a longer one. More natural. More complex. I stared at it. And I didn't even try to understand. because something inside me was tired of failing. I'll do it later, I told myself. But later never came. This is another trap people fall into. Your brain, trying to protect you from discomfort, starts avoiding the thing that causes stress. It feels logical. It feels safe. But avoidance builds the wall higher and higher until one day you don't even try anymore. That night, I lay down and stared at the ceiling. Same room, same silence, same thoughts. But this time, something felt heavier. Because now it wasn't just confusion. It was doubt. What if I never get better? That question doesn't shout. It whispers.
Calm.
Reasonable. Dangerous. Because your brain loves certainty, even negative certainty. If it believes I will never improve, it can stop trying. No more effort. No more disappointment. But also no more growth. I turned to my side and whispered again, almost automatically. I'll call you when I get home. It felt smoother now. Not perfect, but mine. And that's when a strange thought appeared. Maybe the wall wasn't built in one day. So maybe it doesn't have to fall in one day either. Maybe it breaks one sentence at a time. It wasn't a big realization. It didn't solve everything. But it changed something small inside me. Because instead of asking, why is this so hard? I started asking, what is one thing I can understand tomorrow? Just one. Not everything. Just one. And for the first time since I arrived in America, the wall didn't feel impossible. It just felt unfinished. Lost in a different world. Cold air has a personality in America. It doesn't just touch your skin. It interrupts you. That morning, I stepped outside, and the wind cut through my jacket like it didn't care who I was or where I came from. Back home, weather was something you noticed. Here, it felt like something you had to survive. I pulled my jacket tighter and started walking, trying to look like I knew where I was going. That's a skill you learn quickly in a new country. Walk with confidence, even when your brain is completely lost. Because it wasn't just the weather. It was everything. The streets felt wider. The buildings felt taller. Even the silence felt different. People didn't stare. They didn't ask questions. They respected space in a way that felt distant. Back home, silence between people meant something was wrong. Here, silence was normal. Comfortable, even. But for me, it felt like being invisible. That day, I walked into a supermarket again. Same place. Same bright lights. Same endless choices. In America, even buying something simple feels like a decision-making test. 10 types of milk. 20 types of bread. Labels everywhere. Organic. Low-fat. Gluten-free. Plant-based. My brain wasn't just translating language anymore. It was decoding culture. I stood in front of a shelf for too long, holding 2 products, trying to understand the difference. A man walked by and casually said, "You good?" 2 words. "You good?" I froze. Not because I didn't know the words. I did. But the meaning wasn't literal. Was he asking if I was okay? If I needed help? If I was done? Why was it so short? My brain started searching for the correct answer instead of the real one. So I smiled, nodded, said, "Yes." He nodded back and walked away. And just like that, another moment passed where I could have connected but didn't. This is something most people don't talk about when they say learn English. They focus on vocabulary, grammar, pronunciation. But real life? Real life is full of shortcuts, slang, tone, and context. You good doesn't mean are you in good condition? It means something closer to are you okay? Or do you need anything? But when your brain is still translating word by word, you miss the emotion behind the sentence. And emotion is where real communication lives. I paid for my items and walked out, feeling that familiar mix of frustration and exhaustion. Not dramatic, not loud, just steady, like a low battery warning that never disappears. Later that afternoon, I sat on a bench in a small park. The sky was clear, but the air was still cold. People walked their dogs. Some were jogging. Some were just sitting like me, but they didn't look lost. They looked settled. I watched a couple sitting nearby. They were talking, laughing, interrupting each other. Their words overlapped. Their expressions were fast, natural, easy. I tried to follow their conversation. I caught maybe one word out of 10, but something interesting happened. Even without understanding everything, I could feel their connection, the tone, the rhythm, the energy. And that's when a quiet realization started to form. Language is not just words. It's behavior. It's how people pause, how they react, how they express emotions without saying everything directly. In some cultures, people explain more. In others, they expect you to understand without being told. America felt like that. Direct, but also subtle in its own way. Friendly, but also independent. People smile at you, but they don't always invite you in. And if you're not used to that, it can feel like rejection even when it's not. There's actually a psychological concept called cultural dissonance. It happens when your internal expectations don't match the environment around you. Your brain keeps saying this is not how it's supposed to be. And that creates stress. Not because something is wrong, but because something is unfamiliar. That was my entire day. Unfamiliar. Even small things felt confusing. Like how people say, "How's it going?" but don't expect a real answer. Or how "let's hang out sometime" doesn't always mean it will actually happen. Back home, words often matched intention. Here, words sometimes floated. And if you take everything literally, you end up confused, disappointed, tired. That evening, I walked back to my room again. Same path, same cold air, same thoughts. But this time, something was different. I wasn't just frustrated. I was starting to observe. Instead of asking, "Why don't I understand?" I asked, "What am I missing?" Not vocabulary, not grammar, something deeper. I sat down and replayed the moment in the supermarket. "You good?" I said it out loud. "You good?" This time, I tried to imagine the feeling behind it. Casual, light, friendly. "You good?" Again. It sounded more natural now. Less like a sentence. More like a moment. That's when it clicked. To understand English in real life, you don't just translate words. You translate situations. And situations take time to learn. You have to see them, feel them, repeat them. Not perfectly, just consistently. That night, I didn't feel confident. I didn't feel fluent. I didn't feel like I belonged. But I felt slightly less lost. And that's important. Because progress doesn't always look like success. Sometimes it looks like confusion with a little more awareness. I lay down, staring at the ceiling again. Same room, same silence.
But the question in my head changed.
Not why is this so hard, but what if this is part of the process? It wasn't a powerful thought, but it was enough to keep me from giving up that night. And sometimes not giving up is the biggest step forward you can take. A stranger who changed everything. Some changes don't arrive like a dramatic movie scene. No music, no warning. Just a normal moment that quietly shifts your entire direction. It happened on a day that felt exactly like every other day.
Cold air. Fast footsteps.
A mind that was still trying to catch up with everything around it. I walked into the same coffee shop again. Not because I was confident, but because it was familiar. And when everything feels unfamiliar, you hold on to anything that doesn't confuse you. The door opened. Warm air. Coffee smell. Soft music in the background.
Safe.
At least for a few minutes. I stood in line, already preparing my sentence in my head. 1 coffee, please. Simple. Controlled.
Practiced.
My turn came. I stepped forward, looked at the barista, and said it. 1 coffee, please. This time, it came out smoother. She smiled. What kind? And just like that, the system crashed again. But before my brain could panic too much, something unexpected happened. A voice next to me said, gently, "He means a regular coffee." I turned. A stranger. Simple clothes. Calm eyes. A small, understanding smile. Not the kind of smile that laughs at you. The kind that gives you space. I nodded quickly.
Yes.
Regular. The barista nodded and continued the order. Problem solved. But something else started. I moved aside, waiting for my drink, and the stranger stood next to me again. "You're new here?" they asked. The sentence was slow.
Clear. Kind.
I understood it. Not perfectly, but enough. "Yes," I said. "I am new." It wasn't a perfect answer, but it was real. They nodded. I can tell.
It's okay.
Everyone feels like that at first.
Everyone feels like that.
That sentence stayed in my mind. Because up until that moment, I thought it was just me. My problem. My weakness. My failure. But now, it sounded like a shared experience. And something about that made the weight feel lighter. We stood there for a moment in comfortable silence. Not awkward. Not heavy. Just quiet. Then they asked, "Where are you from?" I understood every word this time. Not because it was easier, but because I was calmer. That's another thing people don't realize. When you feel safe, your brain processes language better. The stress goes down. The clarity goes up. "I'm from," I said, slowly, carefully. I expected interruption, correction, confusion, but none came. They listened, just listened. And that changed everything. Because for the first time since I arrived in America, I wasn't trying to survive a conversation. I was part of one. We talked for a few minutes. Simple sentences. Slow pace. Some mistakes. Some pauses. But no pressure. And that created something powerful. A small success. Not loud. Not impressive. But real. There's a concept in psychology called safe exposure. It means facing something difficult, but in an environment where you don't feel judged or threatened. That's what this moment was. English didn't feel like a test. It felt like a bridge. When my name was called, I picked up my coffee. The stranger smiled again.
See?
Not so bad. Not so bad. 3 words. Simple. But they carried a different kind of meaning. Not about language. About perspective. I sat down at a small table, holding my cup, replaying the conversation in my head. I didn't understand everything perfectly. I didn't speak perfectly, but I communicated. And that's the real goal. Not perfection. Connection. I took a sip of coffee and whispered softly to myself, I am new. The same sentence as before, but it felt different now. Before, it sounded like a weakness. Now, it sounded like a beginning. There's something interesting about identity. The way you describe yourself shapes how you experience the world. If you say, I'm bad at English, your brain looks for proof. If you say, I'm learning, your brain looks for progress. That day, something small shifted. Not my level, not my skills, just my identity. From I can't to I'm trying. And that's where real change starts. I stayed in the coffee shop longer than usual. Not because I had something important to do, but because for the first time I didn't feel like I needed to escape. I listened to conversations around me, not trying to understand every word, just listening. The rhythm, the pauses, the laughter. English started to sound less like noise and more like a pattern. Later, as I walked outside, the cold air felt the same. But I didn't. Because something inside me was slightly warmer. That night, back in my room, I didn't feel excited. I didn't feel confident. But I didn't feel hopeless either. And that's a big difference. I picked up my phone and opened a message again. This time, I didn't avoid it. I read it slowly, understood parts of it,
Guess the rest.
and instead of closing it, I replied. Simple sentence. Not perfect, but honest. Thank you. I understand a little more now. I stared at the message before sending it. Part of me was still afraid. Afraid of making mistakes. Afraid of being wrong. But another part of me remembered that moment in the coffee shop.
No judgment.
No pressure. Just connection. So I pressed send. And that small action felt bigger than anything I had done all week. Because it wasn't about English anymore. It was about showing up. Trying again. Even when you're not ready. Especially when you're not ready. I lay down that night, same ceiling, same room. But the thought in my head changed again. Not I don't belong here. Not even I will try. Just something quieter. I'm not alone in this. And sometimes that's enough to keep going. Love without perfect words. Some relationships don't begin with perfect conversations. They begin with pauses, with misunderstandings, with moments where both people are trying, but not always succeeding. That stranger from the coffee shop didn't disappear. They came back into my life in the most ordinary way. Another visit, another quiet hi. Another small conversation that felt just a little easier than before. At first, it was nothing special. Just 2 people talking slowly. Choosing simple words. Leaving space between sentences. But something about those conversations felt different from everything else I had experienced in America. There was no rush. No pressure to be impressive. No expectation to be perfect. And because of that, I started to relax. We talked about simple things. Weather.
Food.
Daily routines. Sometimes I didn't understand everything. Sometimes I answered something slightly wrong. Sometimes I paused too long, searching for words that refused to come. But they never interrupted me, never corrected me in a way that made me feel small. They just listened and responded, and that created something rare. A space where I could be imperfect and still be accepted. One afternoon, we decided to walk together in a nearby park. The same park where I once sat alone, feeling invisible. Now I was walking next to someone, still not fluent, still not confident, but no longer invisible. We walked slowly. The air was still cold, but not as sharp as before. Or maybe I just didn't feel it the same way anymore. So, why did you come to America? They asked. The question was simple, but the answer wasn't. I paused. Not because I didn't understand, but because I didn't know how to say everything I felt in English. I wanted to explain my dreams, my fears, my reasons, my doubts. But all I could find were small, simple words. I want a better life, I said. It sounded incomplete, too basic, but it was true. They nodded, like it was enough. That's a good reason. A good reason. Again, simple words, but they landed gently. And that's when I realized something important. You don't need perfect English to express something real. You just need honest words. As days passed, our conversations became a little longer, a little smoother, still simple but more natural. Sometimes we laughed at my mistakes, not in a cruel way, in a human way, like when I once said, I am boring instead of I am bored. They laughed softly and said, You're not boring, just bored. I laughed too, and in that moment, something shifted again. Mistakes stopped feeling like failures. They became part of the connection. There's actually a psychological principle behind this. When people feel emotionally safe, they are more willing to take risks. And learning a language is full of risks: speaking, guessing, trying. If you feel judged, you stop trying. If you feel safe, you keep going. That's what this relationship gave me. Not perfect communication, but safe communication. One evening, we sat in the same coffee shop where we first met. Same warm light, same quiet music. But everything felt different now. So, they said, smiling, your English is better. I shook my head. No, still bad. They leaned slightly forward.
No.
It's not bad. It's real. It's real. That sentence stayed with me, because I had been measuring my English by perfection.
Grammar. Speed.
Accuracy. But they were measuring something else. Connection. Understanding. Effort. And suddenly my progress looked different. Not as something I didn't have, but as something I was building.
Slowly.
One sentence at a time. That night, as I walked home, I replayed our conversations again. But this time, I didn't focus on what I said wrong. I focused on what I said right. And that changed how I felt. Because your brain believes what you repeat. If you repeat your mistakes, you feel like a failure. If you repeat your progress, you feel like you're growing. The next day, something unexpected happened. They sent me a message. Not short, not simple. A longer message. More natural. More complex. I stared at it. Part of me wanted to close it. To avoid it. To say, I'll read it later. But another part of me, the part that had been growing slowly, said something different. Try. So I read it.
Slowly.
Line by line. I didn't understand everything. Maybe 60%. But that was more than before. And instead of stopping at what I didn't understand, I focused on what I did. Then I replied.
Carefully.
Simply. I read your message. I understand most. Thank you for your patience. I hesitated before sending it. Same feeling as before.
Fear. Doubt.
But also something new.
Trust.
I pressed send. And waited. A few minutes later, the reply came. You're doing great. Really. Not perfect. Not amazing. Just great.
And that was enough.
Because this wasn't just about language anymore. It was about feeling seen. Feeling heard. Feeling like I was moving forward. Even if slowly. That night I lay down again. Same room.
Same ceiling.
But my thoughts had changed. Not, I can't do this. Not even, I will try. Just something softer. I'm getting better. Not fast. Not perfectly. But honestly. And maybe that's what love looks like at the beginning. Not big words. Not perfect sentences. Just two people understanding each other a little more each day. Even when the words aren't perfect. Especially when they aren't. The day I almost gave up. Some days don't build you. They test how much you can take before something inside you quietly breaks. That day didn't start badly. That's the strange part. No warning.
No dramatic moment.
Just a normal morning that slowly turned heavier, sentence by sentence, mistake by mistake, until everything felt too much. I woke up with the same small routine. A simple sentence in front of the mirror. I will try again today. But this time, it didn't feel as real. It sounded like something I was supposed to say, not something I believed. Still, I went outside. The air was warmer than usual, but my mind felt colder. There are days when your body moves forward, but your thoughts stay behind. That was one of those days. I had a small plan. Go to a public office. Ask a simple question. Handle a real-life situation in English. Something normal. Something adults do every day without thinking. I walked in, took a number, and sat down. People around me were talking. Fast. Natural. Effortless. My brain started preparing. What will I say? How will I say it? What if I don't understand? The questions came faster than the answers. My number was called. I stood up, walked forward, sat down across from someone behind a desk. They smiled politely. How can I help you today? A simple question. A very normal question. But in that moment, everything inside me froze. Not because I didn't know the words, but because it was real. There was no replay button.
No subtitles. No time to think.
My mind tried to form a sentence, but the words didn't come out the way I planned. I need help with paper, I said. Not clear. Not complete. Not confident. They leaned slightly forward. Which document? Which document? 2 words. But my brain didn't respond. It searched.
Panicked. Collapsed.
I don't know how to say. I admitted. And there it was. The moment I had been afraid of. The moment where I felt small. Not because of them, but because of myself. They tried to help. They asked more questions. Slower this time.
Kinder.
but my brain had already shut down. This is something neuroscience explains very clearly. When stress becomes too high, your brain shifts from thinking mode to survival mode. Blood flow moves away from areas responsible for language and reasoning and toward areas responsible for basic reactions. In simple terms, your brain stops helping you speak and starts helping you escape. That's exactly what I did. I will come back later, I said quickly. I stood up, left the building.
Wijk fast.
Not looking back. Outside, the air felt heavier than before. Or maybe it was just me. I kept walking. No direction. Just movement. Because standing still meant thinking. And thinking meant replaying everything that just happened. I can't do this. The sentence came back. Stronger this time. More convincing. Because now it had evidence. Real experience. Real failure. I found myself back in the park again. The same bench. The same place where I once watched other people live their lives so easily. But this time, I didn't observe. I just sat and stared at the ground. Minutes passed. Or maybe longer. Time felt unclear. And then, something inside me said it.
Clear. Direct.
Cold. Maybe this is not for you. Not loud. Not emotional. Just final. And that's what made it dangerous. Because when your brain stops arguing, it starts accepting. I thought about everything. The confusion. The mistakes. The exhaustion. The constant feeling of being behind. And for the first time, giving up didn't feel like failure. It felt like relief. No more pressure. No more embarrassment. No more trying. Just stop. I picked up my phone. Opened my messages. Scrolled through conversations I had been slowly building. The simple sentences. The small progress. The connection with that person from the coffee shop. And suddenly, everything felt fragile. Like something that could disappear very easily. All of this for what? I thought. The question didn't have an answer. At least not in that moment. There's a psychological concept called learned helplessness. It happens when someone experiences repeated difficulty or failure and eventually starts to believe that nothing they do will change the outcome. So they stop trying, not because they are weak, but because their brain is trying to protect them from more disappointment. That's where I was. Not lazy. Not unmotivated. Just tired. Deeply tired. I sat there, holding my phone, thinking about sending one message. A simple one. I think I can't continue. Not dramatic. Just honest. My finger hovered over the screen. And then, I didn't send it. Not because I was strong. Not because I suddenly believed in myself. But because something very small stopped me. A memory. That first conversation in the coffee shop. That's okay. Everyone feels like that at first. Everyone. That word came back again. If everyone feels like this at the beginning, then maybe this moment wasn't the end. Maybe it was part of the process. A hard part. A painful part. But still the part. I took a deep breath. Looked up. The sky was still clear. People were still walking. Life was still moving. Nothing had stopped, except me. And slowly, very slowly, I stood up. Not with confidence. Not with motivation. Just with a decision. I won't quit today. Not forever. Just today. Because sometimes thinking about the future is too heavy. But one day is possible. I started walking again. Same path. Same world. But something inside me had shifted. Not from hopeless to hopeful, but from quitting to continuing. And sometimes that's the most important step of all, because the day you almost give up is often the day right before something changes. A tiny habit, a big shift. Change didn't arrive with motivation. It didn't come with a powerful speech or a sudden wave of confidence. It came quietly, almost invisibly, the morning after I decided not to quit. That's the thing about turning points. They rarely feel dramatic. Most of the time they feel small, almost too small to matter. That morning, I didn't wake up excited. I didn't feel stronger. I didn't suddenly believe in myself. But I remembered one sentence from the night before. I won't quit today. So I didn't. Instead of trying to fix everything, I focused on something smaller. Much smaller. Just one sentence. Not 10. Not a full conversation. Just one. I stood in front of the mirror again, like always. Same place. Same reflection. But this time, I didn't try to sound perfect. I just tried to sound natural. I need help with this form. Slow. Clear. Simple. I repeated it again. I need help with this form. Then again. This time, I changed the tone slightly. Less robotic. More human. I need help with this form. Something felt different. Not in the words, but in the feeling. For the first time, I wasn't just repeating English. I was practicing a situation. That was the shift. Instead of memorizing language, I started rehearsing life. There's a concept in learning science called context-based repetition. It means your brain remembers things better when they are connected to real situations, not just abstract information. In simple terms, your brain doesn't want random sentences. It wants experiences. So I gave it one. That day, I didn't plan to do anything big. No long conversations. No difficult situations. Just one goal. Use that sentence. Just once. I went outside. The air felt normal now. Not friendly. Not hostile. Just there. I walked slowly, repeating the sentence in my head. I need help with this form. Not forcing it. Just letting it stay in the background. When I reached a small office nearby, my heart rate increased slightly. Same feeling as before, but not as intense. Because this time, I wasn't trying to handle everything.
Just one moment.
I walked in.
Took a breath.
Walked to the desk. The person looked at me. Hi, how can I help you? Same question as yesterday. Same situation. But this time, something was different. I didn't search for words. I didn't panic. I just said the sentence. I need help with this form. Not perfect, but clear. They nodded. Sure, let me take a look. And just like that, it worked.
No confusión. No freezing. No escape.
Just a simple exchange. It lasted maybe 30 seconds. But for me, it felt like a breakthrough. Not because it was impressive, but because it was repeatable. That's the secret most people miss. Progress is not about doing something amazing once. It's about doing something simple again and again until it becomes natural. I walked out of the office, and for the first time in days, I didn't replay what went wrong. Because nothing went wrong. I replayed what went right. I need help with this form. It worked. So I said it again, quietly, as I walked. I need help with this form. Now it felt easier, lighter, less like a task, more like a tool. That afternoon, I added one more sentence. Just one. Can you explain that again? I didn't try to master it.
I didn't analyze it.
I just repeated it slowly. Can you explain that again? Then I imagined situations. Someone speaking too fast. Someone giving instructions. And me asking them to repeat. That's another shift. When you move from I hope I understand to I can ask for help, you take back control. Because communication is not about knowing everything. It's about managing what you don't know. Later that day, I met that same person from the coffee shop again. We talked. Simple conversation. But this time, something felt different. When I didn't understand something, I didn't pretend. I didn't guess. I said it. Can you explain that again? They smiled. Slowed down. Repeated it. And I understood. Not everything, but enough. And that's when I realized something powerful. Confidence doesn't come from knowing more. It comes from handling not knowing. That small habit, practicing one sentence at a time, started to change everything. Not fast. Not dramatically. But steadily. My brain stopped feeling overwhelmed. Because I wasn't trying to process everything. Just one thing. There's a reason this works. When you reduce the amount of information your brain has to handle, it performs better. Less stress. More clarity. More success. And success, even small success, builds motivation. Real motivation. Not the loud kind. The quiet kind that says, do it again tomorrow. That night, I sat in my room again. Same bed. Same ceiling. But this time my thoughts were different. Not about failure. Not about quitting. Just about one question. What sentence will I use tomorrow?
Simple.
Specific. Possible. And for the first time, learning English didn't feel like climbing a mountain. It felt like taking a step. Just one step. But in the right direction. I lay down and whispered one last sentence before closing my eyes. I can do one sentence. Not everything. Just one. And somehow that was enough to keep me moving forward. Because big change doesn't start with big actions. It starts with something so small, your brain doesn't resist it. And once you start, you don't stay the same. Real life became my teacher. Learning didn't feel like studying anymore. It felt like living with more attention. That's the difference. Before, I treated English like a subject.
Something to sit down with.
Something to solve. Something to get right. Now it followed me everywhere. Quietly. Naturally. Sometimes without me even noticing. That morning, I didn't stand in front of the mirror for long. Just one sentence like always. I didn't catch that.
Slow. Clear.
Useful. Then I stepped outside. No big plan. No pressure to perform. Just one idea in my head. Pay attention to real life. Because real life had become my teacher. And real life doesn't give you lessons. It gives you moments. I walked into the same coffee shop again. Not because I needed coffee, but because it was a place where language happened in a natural way. People ordering. People greeting. People making small talk. All of it real. I stood in line listening. Not trying to understand everything. Just listening for patterns. Can I get a? Do you want? That'll be. Short phrases. Repeated again and again. That's when I realized something important. Fluent people don't create sentences from scratch every time. They use patterns, chunks of language, ready to go, like building blocks. And if you collect enough of those blocks, you don't need to think as much. When it was my turn, I didn't prepare a full sentence. I just used a pattern. Can I get a coffee? It came out naturally. Not perfect,
but smooth.
The barista nodded. Anything else? I caught it this time, not because it was slow, but because I had heard it before. Many times. No, that's all, I replied. And just like that, a full interaction happened.
No panique. No freezing.
Just flow. Small but real. I sat down and watched again. But this time, I didn't feel like an outsider. I felt like a learner inside the system. There's a concept called implicit learning. It means your brain learns patterns without you actively trying to memorize them, just by exposure, repetition, context. That's what was happening. Not in a classroom, not in a textbook, but in a coffee shop, in conversations, in everyday life. Later that day, I went to a grocery store again. Same bright lights, same overwhelming choices. But something inside me was calmer now, because I had a new tool. Not vocabulary, not grammar. Awareness. I listened to people around me. A worker said, "Let me know if you need anything." I caught it, fully, without translating. And something clicked again. That sentence. I could use it. Not in a store, but in other situations. So I repeated it quietly. Let me know if you need anything. Then I changed it slightly. Let me know if I need anything. Not perfect, but flexible. That's another step in learning. From copying to adapting. From repeating to using. As I walked through the aisles, I noticed something else. I wasn't as tired. Before, every sound felt like work. Now, some sounds felt familiar. And familiarity reduces stress. That's science. Your brain uses less energy when it recognizes patterns, which means you feel less overwhelmed, which means you stay longer, which means you learn more. It's a cycle, but this time, a helpful one. In the afternoon, I met my friend again. Same easy smile, same calm presence. We sat in the park. The same park where I once felt completely lost. Now I felt different. Still learning. Still imperfect. But present. We talked. Simple topics. Daily things. At one point they said something too fast. I missed it. But instead of pretending, I used my sentence. I didn't catch that. They nodded. Repeated it slower. And I understood. Not everything, but enough. And that was the moment I realized something deeper. Communication is not about catching everything. It's about staying in the conversation. Before, I would drop out. Silently. Now I stayed. Actively. That's progress. Not loud, but powerful. We continued talking and I noticed something else. I was thinking less about grammar, less about being correct, more about being clear. That's another shift. From perfection to communication. Because in real life, people don't need perfect sentences. They need understandable ones. That evening, I walked home again. Same path, same city. But it didn't feel as foreign anymore, because I had started to build something. Not fluency, not mastery, but familiarity. And familiarity is the first step to belonging. Back in my room, I didn't open a textbook. I didn't review long lists of words. I just sat and thought about my day, the sentences I heard, the patterns I used, the moments I understood. And I repeated a few of them, slowly. I didn't catch that. Can I get a coffee? No, that's all. Simple, real, useful. That's when it became clear. The problem was never that English was too hard. The problem was that I was learning it the wrong way. Too abstract.
Too separate from life.
But once I connected it to real situations, everything started to change. Not quickly, but consistently. I lay down that night, same ceiling above me, but the feeling inside me was new. Not excitement, not confidence, just something steady. I am learning every day. Not because I forced it, but because I lived it. And maybe that's the simplest truth of all. You don't learn a language by studying it. You learn it by using it in the middle of your life. Messy, imperfect,
real.
And somehow that makes it work. Understanding more than words. Meaning doesn't always live inside words. Sometimes it hides in the way people pause, the way they look at you, the way they choose what not to say. That was the next thing I had to learn. Not vocabulary, not grammar, but understanding what people really mean. It started with something small. One afternoon, I met my friend again. Same park. Same quiet space that had slowly become familiar. We sat down, and after a few minutes of casual conversation, they said something that confused me. We should hang out sometime. I understood every word, every single one, but something felt unclear. Should we plan something now? Was this an invitation? Or just a polite sentence? Back home, words like that usually meant action. If someone said it, they meant it. There was intention. There was follow-up. So I responded, carefully. Yes, when? They paused for a second. Not long, but long enough for me to notice. Then they smiled, slightly different this time. Yeah, we'll figure it out. We'll figure it out. Again, I understood the words, but the meaning, less clear. Later that day, I kept thinking about it. Not in a frustrated way, in a curious way, because I was starting to see a pattern. In America, people often use language not just to communicate information but to manage social comfort. We should hang out sometime doesn't always mean a plan. Sometimes it means I enjoy talking to you. Sometimes it means this conversation is good. Sometimes it simply means I'm being friendly. And if you take it literally, you might feel confused or even disappointed. That was a new kind of learning, not about English as a system, but English as a behavior. There's actually a concept called pragmatic competence. It's the ability to understand what people mean beyond the literal words. Tone, context, intention. And without it, even perfect grammar can still lead to misunderstanding. That realization changed how I listened. I stopped asking only, what did they say? And started asking, what do they mean? That same week, I experienced another moment. I was in a small store and the cashier said, "How's your day going?" A simple question. Very common. Before, I would try to answer honestly. Maybe explain my day. Maybe share something real. But I had learned something now. So I smiled and said, "Good. How about you?"
Short.
Natural. Expected. They smiled back.
Good.
And that was it. The conversation wasn't meant to go deeper. It was a social signal. a way to create a small connection without real detail. That's when it became clear. Not every question needs a full answer. Not every sentence needs full meaning. Sometimes language is just a bridge.
Short, light,
Temporary. And once I understood that, something inside me relaxed. Because before, I felt pressure to understand everything perfectly. Now, I understood that perfection wasn't the goal. Alignment was. Matching the situation. Matching the tone. Matching the intention. Later that afternoon, I met my friend again. We walked slowly, talking about simple things. At one point, I said something slightly wrong. I am very interested in this. They smiled, not correcting me immediately, just responding naturally. That's cool. You're interested in it? Interested, not interesting. I noticed the difference.
small,
But important. And instead of feeling embarrassed, I felt aware. That's another shift. From emotional reaction to observation. Because when you stop reacting to every mistake, you start learning from them. We continued walking, and I tried again. I am very interested in this. This time, it felt better. More natural. More aligned. They nodded. Yeah, I can tell. I smiled. Not because it was perfect, but because I adjusted. That's progress. Not avoiding mistakes, but improving after them. There's something powerful about this stage of learning. You're no longer completely lost, but you're not fully comfortable either. You're in between. And that's where real growth happens. Because your brain is constantly comparing, noticing, adapting, refining. That evening, I sat alone again. Same room, same quiet, but I wasn't replaying mistakes anymore. I was analyzing patterns, how people speak, when they speak, why they choose certain words. I thought about that sentence again. We should hang out sometime. This time, it didn't confuse me. It made sense. Not as a plan, but as a feeling. And that's when it fully clicked. Understanding English is not about translating words into your language. It's about translating meaning into your experience. And meaning is flexible, contextual, human. I picked up my phone and scrolled through past messages. Things I didn't understand before started to feel clearer now. Not because my vocabulary had changed dramatically, but because my perspective had. I wasn't just learning English anymore. I was learning how people use English. And that's a completely different skill. Before going to bed, I whispered a sentence again. Not to practice pronunciation, but to feel the meaning. We'll figure it out. This time, it didn't sound confusing. It sounded open, flexible, uncertain but not negative. And maybe that's what life in a new country feels like. Not fully clear, not fully planned, but slowly making sense. I lay down, staring at the ceiling. Same place, but a different mind. Not asking, why don't I understand? But realizing, I understand more than I think. And sometimes, that's the moment when everything starts to connect. Not perfectly, but deeply enough to keep going. Love, marriage, and pressure. Life doesn't pause just because you're still learning. It keeps moving. It adds new layers, new responsibilities, new expectations, whether you feel ready or not. And somewhere between small conversations and quiet progress, love became something more serious. Not sudden, not dramatic, just a natural shift. The person who once helped me order coffee was now part of my daily life. We talked more often, met more regularly, shared more than just simple sentences. And without realizing it, we crossed a line from connection to commitment. But commitment doesn't simplify life. It complicates it in a meaningful way, because now it wasn't just about understanding English. It was about understanding each other. And that's much harder. There were days when everything felt easy. We laughed,
talked,
shared small stories. I understood more, spoke more, felt more confident. And then there were days when everything fell off. Not because we didn't care, but because we didn't always understand. One evening, we sat together after a long day. The room was quiet, but not comfortable. Something felt tense. They said something quickly, too quickly. I caught part of it, but not enough. And instead of asking them to repeat, I guessed. I responded based on what I thought they meant. And it was wrong. Not completely wrong, but wrong enough to create confusion. They looked at me, slightly frustrated. That's not what I said. Not loud. Not angry, but clear. And suddenly, the gap between us felt real again. This is where language becomes emotional, because now it's not about ordering coffee. It's about feelings, expectations,
needs.
And when those things are misunderstood, it hurts more. I tried to explain, slowly, carefully. I didn't understand. I thought you mean. The sentence broke in the middle. Not enough words. Not enough clarity. And that's when frustration started to build. Not just in them.
In me.
Because I wanted to say more. I knew what I felt. But I couldn't express it fully. And that creates a different kind of pressure. Not external. Internal. It feels like being locked inside your own mind. Everything is there. But nothing comes out the way you want. That night, we didn't talk much after that. Not because we didn't care, but because communication failed. And when communication fails, distance grows. Even between two people who want to stay close. I went home with a heavy feeling. Not the same hopelessness as before, but something deeper. Because now I had something to lose.
Before, it was just about me.
Now it was about us. And that changes everything. There's a psychological reality here. When relationships become important, the fear of misunderstanding increases. Your brain wants to protect the connection. But at the same time, limited language ability creates uncertainty. And uncertainty creates tension. The next day, I thought about everything. Not emotionally.
Practically.
What went wrong? Not the feeling. The process. And I realized something simple. I didn't use my tools. I had learned to say, I didn't catch that. I had learned to ask, can you explain that again? But in that moment, I didn't use them.
Why?
Because emotion replaced strategy. That's what happens under pressure. You forget what you know. So I made a small decision. Not a big promise. Not a dramatic change. Just something simple. Use simple tools even in emotional moments. Later that day, we met again. Same place. Same two people. But a slightly different energy. I took a breath and said something first. Yesterday, I didn't understand clearly.
Slow. Honest.
Not perfect.
They looked at me.
Not upset. just listening. So, I continued. I want to understand better. Can you say again? There was a pause. Then they nodded. And this time, they explained more slowly, more clearly. And I listened, not just to the words, but to the meaning. And this time it worked. Not perfectly, but better. And that's when something important happened. We didn't avoid the problem. We worked through it.
Together.
That's what real communication looks like. Not always smooth, not always easy, but active, intentional, and patient. As time passed, we got better at this. Not just me, both of us. They learned to slow down sometimes. I learned to ask more. They simplified. I clarified. It became a system. Not perfect, but functional. And that's enough. There's a truth most people don't talk about. In relationships, language is not just about grammar. It's about effort. When someone sees you trying to understand, they become more willing to help. When you stay silent, they feel distance. So, even imperfect words are better than none. Months later, our relationship became something bigger. More stable. More serious. Marriage came into the conversation. Not as a sudden decision, but as a natural next step. And with that came more pressure. Family expectations. Future planning. Responsibilities. Real life. Not just feelings anymore. And in all of that, English became something else again. Not a subject. Not even just a tool. But a bridge. Between two lives. Two backgrounds. Two ways of thinking. And that bridge needed to be strong. Not perfect. Just strong enough to hold us. That night, I sat in my room again. Same ceiling, but a completely different life. I wasn't alone anymore, but I wasn't finished learning either. And that's when I understood something clearly. Love doesn't require perfect language, but it does require effort to understand and be understood. And if you're willing to keep trying, even simple words can carry something very deep. I lay down and whispered one sentence before closing my eyes. I want to understand you. Not perfect, but true. And sometimes truth matters more than anything else. From silence to confidence. Confidence doesn't arrive like a sudden upgrade.
No switch flips.
No moment where everything becomes easy overnight. It builds quietly from things that once felt impossible becoming normal. That's how I knew something had changed. Not because I felt confident all the time, but because I noticed what no longer scared me. A phone call that used to be one of the hardest things. No body language. No visual clues. Just voice.
Fast.
Unpredictable. Before, I avoided it completely. Let it ring. Let it go to voicemail. Tell myself, I'll call back later. And never do. But one afternoon, my phone rang and I picked it up. Not because I felt ready, but because I didn't want to run anymore. Hello.
My voice was calm.
Not strong, but steady. The person on the other end spoke quickly. Too quickly. And for a second, the old feeling came back. That moment of panic. That small voice saying, "You can't do this." But this time something else was there too.
A tool.
"I'm sorry, can you say that again?" I said.
Clear. Direct.
No apology for existing. Just a request. They repeated it. Slower. And I understood enough to respond. The conversation didn't last long. but it didn't need to, because something bigger had already happened. I stayed in it. That's the difference.
Before I escaped.
Now I stayed. That's confidence. Not perfection. Persistence. Later that day, I realized something else. I wasn't translating every sentence in my head anymore. Some things just made sense. Automatically. Like when someone said, "Take your time." I didn't break it into words. I felt it. Relax. No pressure. That's a different level of understanding. From thinking to knowing. There's a cognitive shift that happens when you repeat something enough times. Your brain moves it from active processing to automatic recognition. In simple terms, you stop working so hard, and things start flowing. Not everywhere, not always, but more often. That's how progress feels. Not like a straight line, but like fewer interruptions, fewer breakdowns, more moments where things just work. One evening, I met my partner again. We were talking about something important. Future plans,
Work. Life.
serious topics. And for the first time, I spoke longer. Not perfect sentences, not advanced vocabulary, but full thoughts. I think we can do this step by step, I said. I want to build something stable first. The sentences weren't complex, but they were complete.
Clear. Honest.
They listened, nodded, responded, and we continued.
No confusión. No frustración.
Just communication. And that's when it hit me. I wasn't the same person anymore. Not because my English was perfect, but because I could express what mattered. There's a powerful psychological effect called self-efficacy. It's your belief in your ability to handle situations. And it grows through experience, not theory. Every time you succeed, even in a small way, your brain updates its belief. I can handle this. And once that belief becomes stronger, everything else changes. You try more. You speak more. You risk more. Not because you're fearless, but because you trust yourself to recover. That's where I was now. Still making mistakes. Still learning. But no longer afraid of every interaction. Even silence felt different. Before, silence meant failure. Now, silence was just a pause. A moment to think. A normal part of conversation. That shift alone changed everything. One afternoon, something unexpected happened. A stranger asked me for directions.
Fast.
Natural. No warning. And for a second I almost laughed. Because not long ago, I was the one lost.
Now someone was asking me.
I didn't understand everything perfectly. But I understood enough. I responded. Slowly.
Pointing.
Using simple words. Go straight, then turn left. They nodded. Got it? Thanks. And just like that, I helped someone. In English. In real life.
No preparación.
No practice. Just response. That moment stayed with me. Because it wasn't about language. It was about identity. I wasn't just someone learning English anymore. I was someone using it. And that's a completely different feeling. That night, I sat in my room again. Same place where everything once felt impossible. Now it felt familiar, comfortable, even a little quiet, but not lonely. I thought about the journey, the confusion, the mistakes, the moments I almost quit, and I realized something simple. Nothing changed overnight. Everything changed slowly. So slowly, I almost didn't notice.
Until now.
That's how real growth works. Not dramatic. Not loud. Just consistent. And then one day you look back and realize, you're not who you used to be. I lay down and whispered one sentence before closing my eyes. I can handle this. Not everything. Not always. But enough. And sometimes enough is exactly what you need to keep moving forward. The moment I almost quit, and didn't. There's a version of this story where I gave up. It's not dramatic. No big scene.
No final argument.
No clear ending. Just a quiet decision. A slow fade. Stop trying. Stop speaking. Stop showing up. And honestly, I got very close to that version. Closer than anyone around me realized. Because from the outside, everything looked fine. I was functioning, working, talking, living. But inside, something felt heavy again. Not like the beginning. Not confusion. Not fear. Something more subtle. Exhaustion. The kind that builds when you've been trying for a long time without seeing clear results. The kind that whispers, maybe this isn't for you. It started during a normal week. Nothing special. Just small things going wrong. Misunderstanding a conversation. Forgetting words I thought I already knew. Feeling slower than everyone else again. And the worst part, I knew more than before. But I still felt behind. That's a difficult place to be. Because progress raises your expectations. And when you don't meet them, it feels like failure. Even when it's not. One evening, I came home and sat down in silence. No phone. No music. Just me and my thoughts. And for the first time in a long time, I asked myself a dangerous question. What if I stop? What if I stop trying so hard to understand everything? What if I stop pushing myself to speak? What if I just accept a smaller life? A quieter one? A safer one? The thought didn't feel dramatic. It felt peaceful. And that's what made it dangerous. Because giving up doesn't always feel like defeat. Sometimes it feels like relief. No more pressure. No more mistakes. No more effort. Just comfort. But comfort has a cost. And deep down I knew it. Because I had already seen what life looked like when I stayed silent. Disconnected. Limited. Watching instead of participating. And I didn't want to go back there. Even if it was easier. So I sat there in that quiet room between two choices. Not success or failure. But effort or avoidance. Growth or comfort. And the truth is both were available. No one was forcing me. No one would stop me if I chose the easier path. That's the reality many people don't talk about. Quitting is always an option. A real one. And sometimes a very attractive one. But then something small happened. Not big. Not life-changing. Just a memory. I remember the first time I ordered coffee successfully. The first time I understood a joke. The first time I had a real conversation. Those moments felt small when they happened. But now they felt important. Proof. Evidence. That I could grow. That I already had. And if I had done it before, why not again? That thought didn't give me energy immediately. It didn't solve everything. But it shifted something. From emotion to perspective. So instead of making a big decision, I made a small one. Just don't quit today. Not forever. Not, I will never give up. That's too big.
Too heavy. Just one day.
Just one choice. Stay in it a little longer. The next morning, nothing felt magical.
No sudden motivation. No excitement.
Just a quiet decision still there. So I followed it. I spoke even when I didn't feel like it. I listened even when it was hard. I asked even when I felt tired. Not perfectly, but intentionally. And something interesting happened. The day passed. And I didn't quit. That's it. Nothing dramatic, but something real. Because momentum doesn't come from big changes. It comes from small decisions repeated, day after day. A few days later, I noticed something else. The heavy feeling was still there, but it wasn't controlling me anymore. It was just present. And that's different. Because you don't need to eliminate difficulty to move forward. You just need to stop letting it decide for you. That realization changed how I saw everything. Learning English, building a relationship, living in a new country. None of it required perfection. All of it required consistency. And consistency doesn't mean always feeling good. It means continuing even when you don't. Weeks passed, then months. And slowly that almost quit moment became something else. Not a failure, but a turning point. Because every time I faced something difficult after that, I remembered, I've been here before, and I didn't quit. That memory became strength. Quiet, invisible, but powerful. One evening, I stood outside looking at the city lights. Same world, same challenges, but a different mindset. I wasn't trying to escape difficulty anymore. I was learning to carry it, and that's a deeper kind of growth. Not removing obstacles, but becoming someone who can move through them. I took a deep breath and said one sentence out loud. Not to practice English, but to remind myself who I was becoming. I'm still here. Simple, but meaningful. Because sometimes staying is the hardest part. And the most important one. If you're watching this right now, feeling tired, frustrated, maybe even close to giving up, this part is for you. You don't need to have everything figured out. You don't need to feel ready. You don't need to be perfect. Just don't quit today. That's enough. And if you can do that again tomorrow and the next day, you might not notice it immediately, but because you became stronger. And sometimes that's the real story. Not how fast you grow, but how long you keep going. This wasn't just a story about learning English. It was a story about almost losing myself and choosing to stay. Through confusion, through silence, through moments where giving up felt easier than trying again. And maybe that's why you're still here watching. Because something in this story feels familiar. Not the exact details, but the feeling. That quiet moment when you question everything. That invisible weight no one else sees. That voice in your head saying, maybe I'm not enough. But here's the truth most people don't tell you. Growth doesn't feel like winning. It feels like doubt repeated and survived. So if you're still here, still trying, still learning, still showing up even when it's hard, you're already further than you think. And this channel? It's not just about English. It's about real stories, real struggles, real progress. The kind no one talks about, but everyone feels. So, if this story stayed with you even a little, subscribe now because the next story might be the one you need at the exact moment you're ready to hear it. Like this video if you've ever felt close to giving up, but didn't. And in the comments, tell me just one thing. What's something you didn't quit? even when it was hard, because your story might be the reason someone else keeps going. This is just the beginning. And the next chapter?